On the edge of Maplewood Ridge, where rolling green hills met crisp blue sky, sat a sprawling, off-grid farmhouse surrounded by fields of wildflowers and buzzing bees. The proud owner of this peaceful patch of land was Jonah Whitaker, a retired engineer with a stubborn streak and a love for renewable energy. His pride and joy? A towering, humming, sleek silver windmill that spun gracefully in the breeze, its blades catching the sun like a kinetic sculpture. Jonah had installed the windmill years ago, back when the power grid had been shaky and the local utility company less than reliable. Being the kind of man who'd rather solve a problem than wait on hold for 3 hours, he had designed and built the windmill himself, sturdy, silent, and efficient. But what started as a personal energy solution grew into something bigger. Over time, Jonah had expanded its capacity, running underground lines and backup systems. Eventually, his windmill was quietly powering not just his home, but 12 others nearby, including a cluster of houses that had popped up in a recent development. Most of those new neighbors were grateful. After all, they paid pennies compared to what the main utility charged, and Jonah's power had never failed during the worst winter storms. But not everyone appreciated ingenuity. Enter Karen Dempsey. Karen had recently moved into the freshly painted white colonial on the hill, complete with black shutters, a 6-car driveway, and a yard trimmed within an inch of its life. Within weeks, she declared herself the president of the newly formed Maplewood HOA, despite the fact that half the neighborhood hadn't even signed up yet. Karen was the kind of woman who believed uniformity was beauty, and any deviation from her vision was a personal attack. So when she noticed the towering windmill on Jonah's land, visible from her second-floor balcony, her eye twitched like a stressed-out squirrel. To her, it was an industrial monstrosity ruining her aesthetic tranquility. To Jonah, it was a beautiful piece of engineering saving her $300 a month on electricity. The first time they met was a Tuesday morning. Jonah was adjusting the windmill's sensors when Karen stomped down his gravel path in a bright peach pantsuit and matching heels, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," she called out in a tone that already suggested she didn't like being excused. "That thing needs to come down. It's an eyesore." Jonah blinked behind his sunglasses. "You mean the windmill?" Karen sniffed. "I mean the industrial turbine ruining the view from my breakfast nook. I filed an HOA complaint. You have 15 days. Jonah just smiled. "I'm not in your HOA. Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're in my line of sight. That's close enough." He chuckled to himself as she stormed off, completely unaware that without his windmill, her morning croissants might have been toasted by candlelight. By the end of the week, Karen had escalated her efforts. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes titled "Say No to Windmill Blight," with dramatic photos of the turbine taken from the most unflattering angles possible. "Industrial intrusion," she called it. "Aesthetic sabotage." One neighbor joked that the flyer made it look like Jonah had built a nuclear reactor next to a preschool. Jonah, however, wasn't laughing. His phone started ringing, confused neighbors asking if it was true the windmill was illegal, if it violated codes, if it really caused low-frequency mind disruption like Karen's flyer claimed. He reassured them patiently. "No, it's perfectly legal. No, it doesn't scramble your brainwaves. And yes," he added with a chuckle, "it's the only reason your Christmas lights didn't flicker during last December's blizzard." But Karen wasn't one to give up. She went door to door, clipboard clutched like a weapon, collecting signatures for her petition to have the windmill removed. She wore a fixed smile that didn't reach her eyes and used phrases like property value preservation and visual harmony of the neighborhood. And when she reached Jonah's house again, uninvited, she decided to up the pressure. "I've consulted with a zoning attorney," she announced smugly, standing on his front porch. "If you don't remove that windmill voluntarily, we'll explore legal action. This community deserves better than to live in the shadow of a glorified fan blade." Jonah, sipping coffee from a mug that read "Live Free" and "Off-Grid," raised an eyebrow. "Karen, that glorified fan blade has been here longer than your HOA, longer than your begonias, and funny enough, longer than your internet, electricity, and gas line." Her smirk faltered. He stepped off the porch and led her around the side of the house. There, nestled beneath a discreet control panel, was a small steel sign, Maplewood Renewable Energy Co-op, S 2017. Below that, a list of addresses, most of them in her new subdivision, benefiting from the windmill's power. Her own house was at the top. Karen stared at the plaque like it had personally betrayed her. "You're telling me that thing powers my house," she spat. "Half of it," Jonah said calmly. "The upstairs, if I recall from the blueprint overlays. Bedroom outlets, most of the kitchen, your toaster. Been running on my wind for weeks." Karen turned a shade of red usually reserved for warning labels. "Well, I refuse to accept your power." Jonah grinned. "You're welcome to unplug, but you might want to check your HOA budget first. My rates are significantly below the utility company." She turned on her heel and marched off in a fury, swearing under her breath about bylaws and backup generators. Jonah watched her go, shaking his head. "She has no idea what she's just started," he muttered. Karen was nothing if not persistent. After the shocking revelation that her morning toast and half her house depended on Jonah's windmill, she doubled down instead of backing off. The next HOA meeting, which she declared mandatory despite having no real authority, turned into a full-blown anti-windmill crusade. She stood at the front of the community clubhouse, dramatic PowerPoint slides flashing behind her, titles like "The Hidden Dangers of Turbine Terror" and "Whirling into Trouble: Why One Man's Windmill Could Destroy Our Peace." She spoke of imaginary fire hazards, phantom headaches, and one truly baffling slide showing a cow fainting near a turbine, allegedly due to low-frequency vibrations. Someone in the back coughed to cover a laugh. Jonah, who'd shown up purely for entertainment, sat with his arms crossed, lips twitching as she described how rotating blades emit aggressive energy patterns that could disrupt human circadian rhythms. Still, a few nervous heads nodded. Fear was a powerful tool, and Karen wielded it with the precision of a micromanaging overlord. The next morning, a new HOA proposal appeared in mailboxes, a motion to restrict industrial-grade structures within HOA-visible zones. Jonah, of course, was not part of the HOA, but Karen had cleverly worded it to include any influential visual disruptions within sightlines of HOA property. "She's trying to pass HOA rules for other people's land," Jonah muttered, shaking his head. He knew he had legal ground under him, but the fight was getting noisier. Neighbors who once waved cheerfully now hesitated, unsure whether to align with Karen's campaign or stay neutral. A few whispered apologies in passing, embarrassed by the drama but too tired to speak up. Then came the drone. Jonah noticed it buzzing around one afternoon as he adjusted the angle on one of the windmill's fins. A little gray quadcopter, hovering closer than comfort allowed. It circled his turbine, dipped toward the power control box, and even drifted near his kitchen window. Suspicious as ever, Jonah followed it with binoculars and saw it land in Karen's yard with all the subtlety of a kid caught peeking through blinds. "She's spying now," he growled, taking out his phone and recording the flight pattern. He didn't confront her yet. Instead, he documented everything. The drone, the HOA flyers, the increasingly desperate accusations. Then he did something that Karen would have never expected. He called every neighbor on the Windmill Co-op list. One by one, Jonah explained what was going on. He reminded them what the windmill provided, how much they were saving, and what would happen if he shut off their grid access in response to Karen's crusade. Most were shocked. Some had forgotten they were even connected to his system. But as the fog of Karen's fear-mongering began to lift, clarity returned. "She's trying to shut down the thing that's keeping our bills low," one neighbor said, stunned. "That woman, out of her damn mind." Jonah smiled. The tide was shifting. Jonah wasn't one for drama, but when it came to his windmill, he wasn't about to let someone like Karen bulldoze years of hard work and goodwill. After that chaotic HOA meeting and the drone stunt, he knew it was time to take action, not just to defend his property, but to remind everyone exactly what the windmill stood for. He started by gathering more documentation: power output logs, maintenance reports, the original permits from the county, and most importantly, the signed agreements from every household connected to the Maplewood Renewable Energy Co-op. These weren't just loose deals, they were contracts, legally binding and registered with the county utilities office. He tucked them neatly into a binder labeled "Evidence of Value and Legality," Windmill Project 2017, present. But the cherry on top came when he checked the smart grid dashboard. Sure enough, the most consistent user of his wind-powered energy over the last 2 weeks. 47 Wisteria Lane, Corinne Dempsey's house. Jonah even had the software to track her exact draw. Her high-efficiency washer, central AC, and all 5 Alexa devices had been spinning on his clean, green energy like clockwork. It was poetic. Still, Jonah wasn't planning a press release. He had something better in mind. First, he quietly called a town council member he'd worked with years ago during the early renewable initiatives. "You wouldn't believe the circus happening here," he said. The councilman laughed when Jonah laid it out. "Sounds like your HOA president needs a crash course in municipal boundaries." They arranged for a town zoning officer to swing by and confirm, in no uncertain terms, that Jonah's land was fully independent and grandfathered in. Then came the real move. Jonah posted a notice on the neighborhood bulletin board and emailed the co-op members. "Community Energy Appreciation Day this Saturday. Come tour the turbine, learn about how your homes are powered, and get the real facts." He also slipped a printed flyer into Corinne's mailbox, just to make sure she wouldn't miss it. He spent the next few days prepping the area around the windmill, laying out fold-up chairs, building a small demo display with miniature wind turbines for the kids, and creating a power flow chart on a whiteboard. He even set up a side table with lemonade, iced tea, and oatmeal cookies. The vibe, educational picnic, but the intent, tactical revenge. Pickle, his orange tabby, sat perched in a folding chair nearby as Jonah took one final walk around the field the night before. Everything was ready. The neighbors were curious. The town was quietly backing him, and Corinne had no clue that Saturday would turn the tables with the force of a windstorm. He looked up at the sleek blades slicing through the dusk sky, smiling as they turned. Steady, silent, and unstoppable. "Let's see how she handles a little truth in the air," he said. Saturday arrived bright and breezy, perfect conditions for both wind power and poetic justice. Jonah had set up the chairs in neat rows facing the windmill, a portable PA system humming quietly beside a folding table covered in blueprints, photos, and fresh-baked cookies courtesy of his neighbor Claire. A simple banner hung overhead. "Powering Maplewood, Community Energy Open House." By noon, neighbors began trickling in, first the curious, then the loyal, and eventually nearly everyone on the co-op list. Jonah greeted them all with a smile, handing out informational pamphlets that broke down the cost savings, grid independence, and the environmental benefits of the windmill. His energy readings from the past year were printed in color-coded graphs, showing the efficiency of the turbine during outages and extreme weather. People were impressed. A few looked outright embarrassed that they'd even considered Corinne's scare campaign. By 1:00 p.m., the lawn was bustling. Kids were playing with the mini turbines Jonah had rigged to power tiny light bulbs. Adults hovered around the display board, nodding along as he explained how the system worked. More than one neighbor expressed amazement that they were still paying Jonah's flat co-op rate instead of the rising prices from the main power company. It was eye-opening. And suddenly, Corinne's hysteria seemed pretty dim next to cold, hard numbers. And then she arrived. Corinne marched down the street in another immaculate pantsuit, her HOA name tag pinned like a badge of honor. She looked around, clearly unprepared for the size of the turnout. Her eyes narrowed at the lemonade table. "This is a publicity stunt," she said sharply, walking straight up to Jonah, who was mid-conversation with a young couple from 2 houses down. "No, Corinne," Jonah said with a calm smile. "This is transparency. You've been spreading a lot of confusion. I figured it was time people heard the facts." Corinne scoffed. "You're using this to make yourself look like a hero. Meanwhile, your turbine is devaluing homes and creating noise pollution." Jonah stepped aside and gestured toward a laptop with a live decibel monitor showing a noise level quieter than a refrigerator. "Feel free to check. The only thing louder than my turbine is your last HOA meeting." The crowd laughed. Corinne flushed but pushed forward. "This isn't over. I'm pushing forward with our zoning complaint." That was when the town zoning officer, who had been quietly sipping iced tea near the cookie table, stepped up and cleared his throat. Actually, Ms. Dempsey, Mr. Whitaker's turbine was approved and permitted back in 2017 under the county's Renewable Pilot Ordinance. His property is not within HOA jurisdiction and is, in fact, considered a contributing energy provider under a local utility exemption. You have no authority here. The silence that followed was delicious. Corinne's jaw opened and closed like a goldfish gasping for relevance. Then she turned, muttering something about illegal signage and cookie bribery before storming back toward her house. The crowd slowly began to murmur again, some laughing, some shaking their heads, many walking right up to Jonah to thank him. A few even asked how they could expand the co-op and get more wind power added to their homes. As the windmill spun calmly behind him, Jonah just nodded, offering a cookie to a wide-eyed teenager. "Sometimes," he said, "you let the wind speak for itself." The following week, Maplewood Ridge was buzzing, with laughter, praise, and the occasional Karen impression circulating in group chats. Someone had taken a video of the zoning officer shutting her down and added dramatic music. It had been shared dozens of times, and now Jonah's windmill wasn't just a community utility. It was a symbol. A towering, elegant middle finger to overreach and small-mindedness, spinning peacefully against the sky. Karen, meanwhile, had gone noticeably quiet. The HOA newsletter that usually arrived with militaristic regularity was suddenly missing from everyone's mailbox. Her once frequent patrols, complete with yardstick, clipboard, and pursed lips, had all but disappeared. Some said she'd been licking her wounds. Others said she was plotting her next move. Jonah figured it was both, but he wasn't worried, not anymore. Because now, the entire neighborhood had his back. And it was time to deliver the final, ironic blow. Jonah composed a letter, not to Karen, but to the HOA board and every household in the co-op. It was cheerful, professional, and full of just the right kind of humor. He announced that due to popular demand and the overwhelming support received during the Community Energy Open House, he was expanding the windmill's output capacity to serve more homes, offering new memberships at the same low rate. He attached an application form and a copy of the zoning approval, just for fun. But the best part, a line in bold, centered in the middle of the page. Please note, 47 Wisteria Lane is currently the largest residential consumer of windmill-generated power. Should any residents wish to opt out, alternative arrangements must be made with the regional utility provider at standard commercial rates. That line spread like wildfire. By noon, Jonah's phone was blowing up with messages from amused neighbors, some asking to join the co-op, others gleefully screenshotting the section about Karen's home. One even dropped off a hand-drawn thank you card featuring a cartoon windmill battling a dragon in a peach pantsuit. Then came the cherry on top. Jonah partnered with the high school's environmental science teacher to host a wind power education week, using his field as a learning site. Students would tour the windmill, study its mechanics, and even build small turbines of their own. The town approved the initiative and awarded Jonah a modest grant to support it. It was official. His windmill was now not just practical, not just legal, but educational. That Friday, Jonah caught sight of Karen stepping out of her front door, holding her phone, scrolling through something with a look of pure horror. Her gaze shot up toward the windmill, then toward the groups of laughing teens walking past with miniature turbine models under their arms. She slowly retreated back inside. Jonah grinned from his porch, raised his lemonade in salute to the horizon, and said softly, "And that, my friends, is what we call sustainable justice." Karen's fall from HOA royalty was nothing short of Shakespearean, if Shakespeare had written about energy-efficient vengeance and yard politics. In the days following Jonah's announcement and the high school partnership, her influence collapsed like a soggy gingerbread house. The neighborhood message boards, once carefully monitored by Karen for rogue holiday decorations or mailbox infractions, were now flooded with jokes, memes, and enthusiastic reviews of Jonah's windmill tour. Someone even edited the HOA meeting notes template to include a permanent footer. Powered by the wind Karen wanted gone. The real humiliation, however, came during what was supposed to be Karen's big moment. A Beautify Maplewood presentation at the town center, where she planned to highlight her vision for a more aesthetically consistent community. She arrived in a pressed pastel blazer, heels clicking like a warning signal, but the crowd waiting in the hall wasn't exactly sympathetic. Most of them had seen the viral clip of her being corrected by the zoning officer. A few even wore t-shirts with cartoon turbines and slogans like, "Keep calm and let it spin." As she launched into her usual speech about visual cohesion and neighborhood standards, someone raised a hand and asked if she still used windmill power. When she tried to dodge the question, another person chimed in, "Because if not, I hope you're enjoying those full-price utility bills." A few people laughed. Then more joined in. By the time someone shouted, "Give the windmill a trophy," Karen was visibly flustered, her cheeks blotchy and her voice cracking. She cut her speech short. Back home, Jonah watched a live stream clip with Pickle curled in his lap, sipping from a mug that now read, "One man's turbine, another woman's meltdown." His porch was covered in thank you notes, fresh cookies, and even a handmade wooden sign from a neighbor that read Whitaker Windworks, S 2017, still standing. The Enforcer Energy nickname stuck. The turbine was now Maplewood's unofficial mascot. Local news ran a short segment on the town that backed the breeze, featuring drone footage of Jonah's windmill spinning proudly with soft music playing beneath. Karen didn't appear in the piece, though her house did, labeled discreetly with, "Powered by the same wind she protested." Jonah didn't gloat, not openly. But when he added a small weather vane to the top of the turbine, shaped like a tiny clipboard spinning in the breeze, he figured people would get the message. Karen, for her part, remained inside more often. The once daily HOA updates dried up. Her bold landscaping plans disappeared. A for sale sign appeared in her yard not long after the windmill made it into the town's Points of Interest brochure. Her last message on the community board was a short, clipped sentence. "Moving, good luck with your projects." The turbine turned, elegant and calm, a constant reminder that some forces are just too strong to fight. With Karen officially out of the picture, her house sold to a quiet couple who ran a yoga studio and brought homemade granola to the neighborhood brunch. Maplewood Ridge finally settled into the harmony it had always promised. The windmill stood at the heart of it all, humming softly through every season like a metronome, keeping the rhythm of progress and peace. Jonah's energy co-op expanded. 5 more houses joined within a month, and he upgraded his turbine's battery storage system to accommodate the growing demand. What began as a personal project had become a small-scale renewable revolution. Kids waved to the windmill on their way to school. Neighbors brought him pie just for keeping the lights on. The local paper named him Community Innovator of the Year, and his porch became a place of both welcome and wisdom. The high school science classes became regular visitors, and even the town's utility company, once skeptical, now treated him as a friendly partner. His once quiet property was alive with learning, laughter, and yes, plenty of wind jokes. The little turbine models the kids made sat proudly in windows all over town. One had even been placed in the mayor's office. And as for Jonah, he enjoyed the peace. He still sat on his porch every morning with a cup of coffee, pickle in his lap, watching the blades turn lazily in the breeze. But now, instead of solitude, he had community. Instead of conflict, he had legacy. People no longer saw the windmill as an odd quirk. They saw it as Maplewood's symbol of progress, of standing firm when pettiness tried to blow through. The memory of Karen became just another story, retold with laughter at block parties and barbecues. "Remember when she tried to turn off the power that was literally keeping her blender running?" someone would say, and the whole table would burst out laughing. One afternoon, as a group of school kids were touring the turbine, Jonah added a new plaque to its base. Simple, wooden, engraved with care. It read, "The winds of change, turning resistance into power since 2017. He stepped back, looked at the spinning blades, and smiled. Because while Karen had tried to tear it down, she ended up proving exactly why it needed to stand tall. And Maplewood would never forget the lesson. You can file complaints, you can send flyers, you can even fly a drone. But when the wind's on your side, good luck stopping it.